Hello and welcome to On the Edge. I'm Ernest Granson. With me today is Laurie Weston, CEO, President, and founder of Sound QI, an advanced geoscience analytics company and developer of the geological data integration software called Maestro. Laurie, it's good to talk to you today, all the way from Perth, Australia.
Yes, good to talk to you, Ernest.
Sound QI has come a long way from its beginnings as a provider of seismic reservoir analysis in the Canadian oil sands. Can you describe the origins of not only Sound QI, but also its predecessor company, Oil Sands Imaging?
Okay, well, that's going back a ways. I have to start with, I guess, kind of the context of where I was in my life at that point, which was just starting a family. So I had little kids at home, babies even, and I had a professional career already. I was a geophysicist working with seismic interpretation for multiple large companies, starting with Shell and then going overseas to England, working Europe, Africa, Middle East, interpreting seismic data for subsurface objectives, oil and gas. When I started my family, I stepped back a bit and I wanted to do something a little, I guess, less intense. I still wanted to do what I was doing. I was passionate about what I was doing and really enjoyed it. And so I went part-time with a company called Wascana Energy, which was actually Saskoil head office in Regina, but they had an international office, a small international office. And so I joined that office in London, England, and then went back to Canada with them when they closed that office. While I was at Wascana Energy, I decided I was going to cut back a little bit, go to part-time because I had my babies at home. So I cut back to 4 days a week after the first baby and 3 days a week after the second baby. And I was down to 2 days a week after the third baby. And so going from a fairly high profile career position to 2 days a week, I kind of got the, you know, I don't know, not really the silent treatment, but I got put in an inside office. I was sharing with a contractor. I wasn't invited to meetings anymore. I kind of got shunted to a different track, which, you know, when I tell this to women, they're kind of offended that this actually happened, but it did. And those were the times. And I can kind of understand that as a business owner. Now you've got somebody whose prime focus is not the business, it's something else. But I was happy to have that anyway, the 2 days a week, and happy that they were able to accommodate that. Because I wasn't going to meetings anymore, I was pretty much doing my own thing. And I came up with a process of analyzing seismic data that would reveal some information that was really critical to the way oil sands in particular were developed. And I won't go into the technical details, but this had the potential to change the game as far as I could see. And so I started working on that without anybody's knowledge, really, because they didn't bother with me too much in that inside office, and I'd come and go as I pleased. And I was really working hard on this, but I didn't have very good equipment. So my computers would regularly crash. The IT people would do updates on the weekend to systems when I had jobs running. So those jobs would crash. And I'd come in on Monday and my job wouldn't finish and it would be corrupted and I'd have to start over again. And then when the computer crashed one day and I was watching it go through, I knew it was going to be 20 minutes of disk checking. I thought, you know, I could just buy my own computers. I could buy my own computers. I could lease this software I'm using because it's commercial. So I sat there while my computer was doing its thing and I doodled a logo and I came up with a name for the company. And by the time the computer was back up and running, I had a business plan. So my business plan was really to just go buy computers and lease the software.
All right. Well, so take us. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You weren't finished. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, it's there's more to it. So then part of the planning was when I was going to do this because I couldn't just leave that day and start had to do some preparations. So I didn't have an office. I thought, well, maybe I'll just set this up at home. And I also didn't have any projects. I didn't have anybody that was going to pay me to do this work. So I started going out for coffee with people and saying, hey, if I started this, would you have a project for me? And so by the time I started the business, I had 4 committed projects. Before I even bought the computers, I had 4 committed projects. And in the meantime, I also was chatting to a friend who had a company, and he said he'd had some spare office space, so I didn't have to do it in my basement. So I started up the company and called it Oil Sands Imaging. So that was a while ago. Can I keep going?
Sure. Take us through
Okay.
it.
Yeah. So how did Oil Sands Imaging become Sound QI? Well, oil sands is a very particular, what we call play in geology, is a certain petroleum system and a certain development type and style, which is pretty much, invented in northern Alberta. What about all the other oil companies that are in the Gulf of Mexico, or the Permian Basin in the US, or Europe, or North Sea, or wherever? What about all those other companies? What are they doing? And could they use what we had? Well, the process that I was doing, that I started the company with, was really something that applied anywhere. So instead of limiting us to oil sands, we decided to change the name. So the name changed to Sound QI, sound being related to the sound waves, seismic data that we analyzed. Sound is also a thorough method of doing things. So it was a double meaning that was perfect for this situation. QI stands for quantitative interpretation. And quantitative interpretation means we're taking that sound wave data, and we're not just looking at patterns, we're looking at the actual values or the measurements of those patterns. And so with those measurements, we can put them together in graphs and do analytics on them and come up with a translation from those measurements to geological properties like rock type, like the fluid types, whether it's gas, oil, or brine water, which is typically what most of geology contains, is water. So we want to find places where there was oil and gas. So this was a quantitative way of analyzing data. So we changed the name to Sound QI. Within a month of changing the name, we were taken over by another company in Calgary. Yeah. So for 5 years, I was the director of geophysics at Canadian Discovery, which is a consultancy, a broader consultancy in Calgary that offered hydrogeology and geomechanics and engineering and the rest. And we were the geophysics team. So for 5 years, I was director of geoscience or geophysics in that company, as really the takeover of Sound QI. During that time, we started developing some software. Actually, we developed it before we got taken over, but it wasn't commercial. So during that time, we worked on commercializing it. And at the time, the software was called IMAC, which stood for Interactive Multi-Attribute Classification. And that was a way of interpreting. So rather than us doing it for people, we couldn't possibly be able to do this for every company that had data in the world, but we developed this software that would allow those companies to do it themselves. So that was what IMAC was for. And Canadian Discovery wasn't too keen on the name. They thought we were going to get a letter from Apple, a legal letter from Apple. I was kind of looking forward to that. I thought, I'm going to put that on my wall if I get a cease and desist letter from Apple. It never came. We changed the name anyway to QI Pro, which seemed to make sense to us. We've since changed it to Maestro, and there's a good reason for that. But as we were developing that software, we started to get some interest from oil companies locally. So we started selling the software. Right about that time was 2016. 2016, there was a downturn in the oil industry, energy in general. And it was a real low point. Lots of companies were losing money, cutting staff. And I knew that our team was going to get cut because we had run out of work. So I talked to my boss and I said, I'd like to get my company back. And so we negotiated and I restarted in the middle of a downturn, Sound QI 2.0. So that was January 2017. And it was a really tough time. You know, it was just me and one other guy. Our team that had been taken over by Canadian Discovery was 8 people. When we restarted in 2017, we were 2. Me and my co-founder, Carl Riney, who's a PhD in geophysics, and he's still with the company today, and he's super busy doing projects around the world, hence my visit to Perth and Malaysia earlier and Indonesia. So we started with 1 consulting project and 1 software sale, and that was all we sold for pretty much a year and a half. So we had no money coming in, we took no salaries, and eventually we hired back the developer that I had before working on that software. He came on, he quit another job that he was getting paid for, and he came on to work on this software for us for free for a little while. And eventually we scraped enough money together to start paying him. Within 2 years, I guess, we were all getting paid, and we'd hired a couple other people. So we gradually worked our way back up to what we had been, and now beyond. So that was almost, well, that was 2017. That was close to 10 years ago. And since then, we've gotten other customers for our software QI Pro, but we realized that it was the name was limiting us, because the name had this connotation of technical processes, whereas our software is more visual logic. It's more of a creative way of combining different data types to come up with a unique interpretation that honors all the data and gives you real insights. So it took months to figure out what kind of name would actually relate to that and would convey this broader integration of different data types. And finally, a friend of mine, just who knows really nothing about the industry, blurted out, well, how about Maestro? Because that's an orchestra. You can't make music with just the drums. You can't make music with just the cymbals. That was what people were trying to do with different data types in oil and gas. They were trying to make decisions based on one data type or another data type, but very rarely did you see them all integrated. So that's how the name Maestro came about, and that's what we are promoting and selling today, and we're getting interest in various places. As I said, that's why I'm here in Perth. So there's the story.
That's the journey. Well,
Yeah, that's the journey.
Speaking of Maestro, speaking of that type of software, I wonder if you can explain the mental process that you and your colleagues had to follow in order to actually write the programming. I don't know if you did the programming, but to write the programming to create this software that encompasses all of the functions that you had envisioned.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was back in the oil sands imaging days before we were taken over. I was doing most of the consulting work myself back then. I was the one pushing the buttons on the commercial software we used for the very sophisticated geophysical processes that had to be done on the seismic data. And I was delivering products. I was delivering products to companies, my clients, and there were multiple versions of the products. And this was intentional because there's multiple ways of looking at data, so you needed to present all of them. And they didn't know what to do with them. They would put them into their viewing software and they would look at them all, and they'd pretty much always choose just 1 or 2 maybe. And they would do a very conventional pattern recognition interpretation on that. So just picking geometry really out of those products that I delivered. And I saw that, and I said to myself, they're missing the point. The point is that all of these things, all of these characteristics or different attributes that I'm delivering are different aspects of the same thing. So if you're looking at only one aspect, you're only getting one perspective on that thing. You really need to look at all aspects together. I use the example of the 5 blind people trying to describe an elephant, and one is holding the tail and saying, well, it's like a rope. Another one is holding the trunk and saying, oh, it's more like a snake. Another one is rubbing the side and saying, no, it's like a wall. It's like solid brick wall. Another one's got the leg and saying, no, it's a tree trunk. So none of these are actually getting the full picture or the accurate real picture unless you put them all together spatially. So you have to know where each observation is coming from, and you have multiple observations that then give you the whole picture, and you can say, oh, well, it's an elephant. So that's what was missing when I delivered all my different aspects. I was delivering the different observations that had been derived from the data, but they weren't putting the observations together into a whole picture. And there wasn't software that would do that. So I knew what had to be done. So I started writing little scripts for each different project. I started writing a script that would combine things in the way I thought would make sense. But it wasn't interactive. You couldn't visualize it. You had to run the script and then display the result and see if it made sense. So I was describing this to a friend, and they said, well, why don't you just write software to do it? And I thought, oh, I'm not a programmer. I can't do that. But I went away and thought about it. And so I started asking around to see if anybody knew any good programmers. A friend of mine referred me to one guy who came in for an interview, and I had written out what I wanted to do and showed him an example of one of my scripts. And I said, I'd like to automate these scripts so that I can use them without rewriting them for every project. I said, how long is that going to take? He said, about 3 weeks. So 3 weeks later, he came back with something that worked. And then I said, okay, now I've been thinking about this, and I also see from this the possibilities. So now I want to see visually. I want to see a display interactively. If I make any changes to this, I want to see the display change in front of my eyes so I can refine these things. I said, how long is that going to take? Oh, a couple more weeks. So 6 months later, he comes in and he says, you should just hire me. And I said, okay, you're probably right. So I hired him. And last year he retired after 15 years with the company. So he was, and pretty much for the first 5 years, he was the only person working on the software. But it just grew from there. So I'm not a programmer, but I had a vision that each time I saw the next step, I could see a whole other vision opening up. And so I still have that. I still have a lot of things that need to be done on this that I think would really completely change the way people interpret data. And now we're not talking just seismic data or subsurface oil and gas data. One of the companies here in Perth that's using our software is a mining company. So that's still in the same domain. It's still subsurface, different product, different characteristics, different challenges. But there's also other data types. Any other data type, even if you're describing an elephant, you could put that data into our software and you could visualize the parts of that elephant that are coming together. So imagine if it's MRIs, brain scan data, ultrasounds, CT scans. All of that is exactly the same idea. It's just measurements, remote sensing measurements, with some sort of spatial component that you can put in context. So there's a lot of potential for this method that we've developed.
In so many different sectors, it sounds like, and there's an interesting comment that you made in describing the software, and that is, it says, as the company evolved, it became obvious that the workflow was actually applicable to any geological play anywhere on or off the planet. So what is that about?
Well, there's space exploration. There's data being gathered on Mars, and there's data being gathered from asteroids. I've talked briefly to a professor at UBC who is involved in the OSIRIS project, which is a joint NASA project with a bunch of different institutions. And they have sent a probe to an asteroid. They've gathered data. They've actually acquired some seismic data on this asteroid.
Hmm.
Very rudimentary sound waves that have been sent into the rock and collected back again. So I haven't seen any of that data. I haven't pursued that angle yet, but it's certainly something that I want to, if I have time. I joke that our first company name, Oil Sands Imaging, OSI, could also stand for outer space imaging.
That would be a goal in the fairly near future, do you think?
I don't know. I don't
Well,
know. If anybody watches this and says, "Oh, I
mhm.
have the perfect data set that would allow
Mhm.
you to test it," then
Hmm.
yes, please send me a message.
Well, it must be pretty gratifying to help all of these major international energy companies find liquid and gaseous gold. I mean, do you still enjoy the thrill of the hunt?
Yes, I certainly do. The thrill of that is exhilarating. Um, Running a business, however,
Hmm.
can really be a struggle at times. So, and I have to do both. I've got the thrill of that excitement and
Hmm.
that innovation and that vision, but I've also got the day to day, making sure that the money is coming in and not going out faster than it's coming in, and that I can find the right people to do the right jobs, and I can inspire customers, and I can teach them how to use the software, and they can use it effectively so that they are ambassadors for the not only the software but the company. I have to, of course, apply for grant money now and then from the government if it's available. That's always a lot of work. There's accounting, there's marketing, there's sales, there's HR. The list goes on. So I find it difficult some weeks, some months even, to get back to the kind of real idea innovation
Hmm. Hmm.
um, stuff that I love, and also just using our software, using that software uh, on new projects. If we get a new project like the mining project we're working on now, if we get that new project, I'm excited to dive in and see that data, because there's nuggets of gold, and you're talking about oil and gas being gold, but this is data gold. There is information in the data that nobody has ever seen before, and we can reveal things that actually, and we've heard this from some of our clients, we're revealing things we never saw before, and we acquired the data 10 years ago, and we've had every other software application looking at it, and now we're revealing things, exciting things. So that's the thrill for me.
Hmm. Now, you're also a distinguished lecturer. You've presented on a wide range of topics, including the future of oil and gas. What do you see in the crystal ball for Sound QI? I mean, you've discussed a little bit of that already, but what do you see in the future for not only your company but the industry and the wider energy world?
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, it's been a roller coaster for the oil industry in particular. Um, all kinds of context, whether it's environmental or social or geopolitical. And I don't pretend to be an expert on any of those things, but what I've had to do in my career and what we've done as a company to survive and to adapt is to read the room and make changes quickly. Sometimes we have to pull back, and obviously there was the whole COVID um, disruption, and that affected everything, not just oil and gas. Although oil prices did go down to negative at some point, companies were paying people to take the oil out of their tanks. Um, but for a small company like ours, that was a huge challenge. And as soon as we started losing contracts that had been committed already, uh, I realized we had to react fast. So we tried to keep everybody on staff. we all took a pay cut immediately, and we made some changes to cut costs. But after about a year of that, we had to cut a few people, unfortunately. And that's the only time we've ever had to cut people for a financial reason. So it was really, really tough times. And I know lots of companies did not survive. So I'm pretty proud of the fact that we managed to navigate that. And there have been other, I mean, as a small business, you're buffeted by every little wave that comes along. And it could be that a company that you're working for gets taken over by a bigger company. That bigger company doesn't know who you are. They don't care. They feel like they've got every other sophisticated application and scientist in their company already. So they drop whatever the other company had been doing for us. So that comes out of the blue. We don't know that's happening. And when we see it announced in the newspaper, it's like, oh, okay, we know what's coming next. We're going to lose this good customer. So that's that kind of thing is constantly happening. And I used to lose sleep over it, like literally, severely, and, high stress, anxiety, lack of sleep, bad decisions, snapping at people. And then I realized, okay, this is business. If I'm going to be a business owner, if I'm going to be an entrepreneur, if I'm going to be a leader, I have to figure out how to manage that in myself. So that I think I've managed to do for the most part. There's still times when you go beyond your, limit, but I have, I sleep regardless of the situation. I sleep, let's see, 4 out of 5 nights, let's say. So,
Well, it's
yeah.
not a bad record as long as you can catch up on your sleep the rest of the nights. Now,
Yeah.
a few years ago, you took on another challenge. You became the co-founder of a news company called Big Media. Explain how that came about.
Yeah. Well, that's Rob Driscoll's inspiration, as you know. Rob Driscoll is a journalist and has been for many years, his whole career. And we met during COVID. So we met right at the beginning of COVID. And so he had some challenges he was dealing with, partly because of COVID and partly because of digitalization of print media and that kind of thing. And I was, of course, having to deal with not only my business, but realizing the impact that the COVID shutdowns were going to have on our business and how to navigate that. And the other thing was everybody was working from home. So we had a lot of time to chat, Rob and I, because there wasn't a need to get up in the morning and go to the office. So we had a lot of time to chat. And he and I were both appalled at the information that was being conveyed in the news media about COVID. And I think we both had a desire to figure out the truth. So he had been doing some digging on different data that was available through government websites. And as he tells the story, he had published something that was 100% truthful with data that came from the Alberta government. And this was posted on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn deleted the post saying that it was, I can't remember what the reason was, but it obviously didn't fit the narrative. So they deleted the post, and that surprised both of us. And he said, well, I think it's time to start my own news media business. And I said, well, you have to get the data right. You have to get the right data. You have to show it impartially. Don't apply any biases. Let the data speak for itself in many ways. And don't get too opinionated. Don't take a side. Don't pick a side. And so we talked about that and decided that was pretty much missing in the media that was available at the time. And I would say that there are, things have maybe gotten even worse since then. But we decided to start that. So we worked together on that, finding somebody to help us build the website and come up with a name. Again, we went through lots of ideas, just like when we were trying to find Maestro, and we came up with Big Media. Big, B-I-G, actually originally stood for Business Intelligence Group. And we shortened it to Big. So the Business Intelligence Group is not even part of the name anymore, but it's now Big Media. And of course, that has multiple meanings as well and connotations. And it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek answer to, the mainstream media. So that was back in February 2021, we launched. And it was a lot of work. I was struggling to try to navigate the COVID effect on my day job, while also working with Rob to help get this established and get it going. And he told me he didn't know anything about data. That's not true. He does know something about data, but he doesn't know how to work with data from a statistics point of view. So I said, okay, well, I'll be your data, I guess your data officer in some ways. So he called me the scientific strategist. Is that what I am? Something like that. Anyway, so I thought that I would be reviewing other people's work and editing it for publication. But as it turned out, I ended up doing a fair amount of it myself, partly because one of the first articles I reviewed had some data in it on causes of death in Alberta. And I was looking at it and I was asking myself some questions about it. And it wasn't complete. The data was a subset of what was available. And I thought, okay, I'm going to have to go back to the source. So I went to the source and I downloaded all the data of all the causes of death in Alberta over the past 20 years. And at that point, COVID was not considered a cause of death in that database, but it was obviously assigned as a cause of death throughout 2020. So I downloaded the data, which was a year out of date, maybe even more than a year, about 18 months out of date. So it didn't have COVID in the database that year, but I combined it with the COVID deaths that were being reported from the Alberta Health Database and came up with some really good charts that showed the trends of death rates. And it really only makes sense if you break them down in different categories. So you look at the different categories of gender, of age group, because obviously things that kill men in their 90s are different than things that kill women in their 40s. So as you know, on the main trends, considering like cancer and heart disease and accidents and dementia and suicides and homicides and all kinds of other things. So I learned a lot about how people die in Alberta and how many of them and of what. So that got me on a path that I just needed to keep digging. So it wasn't just the COVID and causes of death data that I was looking at. It was energy, which of course I'm involved in, and that's how the whole future of oil and gas speaking engagement came out, is because I had published an article that showed the mix of energy types that different countries use and how that's changing over the years. So that was really interesting to see different groups of countries and what powers them. Is it coal? Is it oil? Is it nuclear? Is it natural gas? Is it hydro? And how are renewables, wind and solar and geothermal, fitting into that? And are they keeping up with demand, or are they growing the proportion in that energy mix? So all these questions are never properly, thoroughly answered in the media. The media will give you the emotional, or maybe even the propaganda sound bites, but they won't give you the real data and the real trends and put that in real context. So that was my part of big media. And I think I counted one time, I think I've written over 30 articles Not so much in the past couple of years because I have been, fully occupied by what's happening with Sound QI. But it's a passion of mine for sure.
Mhm.
I love that kind of thing.
So, Laurie, on a personal front, I hear you become a grandmother. How has that
Yes.
experience been trying to fit everything in there?
Yeah. Well, that's just another aspect of a full life, right? Um,
Hmm.
yeah, my oldest daughter has 4 little boys now. So they range in age from 7 to 1, and they all live in Vancouver Island. So I love that I have an excuse to go to Vancouver Island again because I went to university in Victoria and ended up with a career in Calgary and elsewhere. So it's nice to have that reason to go back to Victoria, which actually started with all my 3 daughters who eventually moved there. But with my grandsons and my daughters all in Vancouver Island, it's a really nice interlude. So
Hmm.
I will go there. I can never get a full day off without working, because there's always some fires that need to be, if not put out, at least contained. And so I have recognized that used to frustrate me. It used to frustrate my family. But now the way I handle it is I tell them in advance, I'm going to need 2 hours a day. And I did this with my daughter on holiday not too long ago. We went to a beautiful island off the coast of Malaysia for a week. And I said, this is lovely, but I'm going to need 2 hours a day to work. And once I do that, then I can put it aside and I can enjoy the rest of the day. Because if I don't do that 2 hours, I'm thinking about it, I'm stressed, it's occupying my
Hmm.
mind while I'm sitting on the beach or, you know, on a boat or whatever. So if I can do those 2 hours, then the rest of the day is good. I can play with the grandkids if I'm there. I can, go to the park with them or help them ride their bikes or throw a ball for the dog or, so that, and that's just, where my heart is. So
That is the fate of a business owner, isn't it?
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So
Well,
balancing that is
mhm,
really
mhm.
important. And so for my own peace of mind and also, for my family.
Well, Laurie, we thank you so much for taking us through your journey and that of Sound QI, and we look forward to seeing what's next for you and for your company.
Well, it's been a real pleasure, Ernest. Thank you very much.
And I thank all of you for tuning in. For On the Edge and Business Edge Magazine, I'm Ernest Granson.